Welcome to the Modern Husbands podcast, where any combination of Dr. Ross, Christian Sherrill, and Brian Page host national experts who share winning ideas to manage money and the home as a team. This week, we are honored to welcome Ron Lieber. Ron is the author of The Opposite of Spoiled, Raising Kids Who Are Grounded, Generous, and Smart About Money, and the author of The Price You Pay for College, an entirely new roadmap for the biggest financial decision your family will ever make. Ron has been the Your Money columnist for the New York Times since 2008. Most recently, Ron authored the online course for parents, The Price You Pay for College, Understanding Merit Aid. The goal of this episode is to help parents understand college aid to fully understand the financial implications of college award letters. Enjoy the show.
Ron, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with some basics. What is merit aid?
Sure. I mean, the best way to understand merit aid is as a kind of off-the-top discount on college tuition and room and board that doesn't have very much to do with your financial status, with what you earn or what you have. It has more to do with your kid and what your kid has done in high school, their grades, their test scores, their extracurricular activities, other ways that they've distinguished themselves that would cause a college to want them to discount their prices to get the kid to come and for you as the parent or parents to commit to paying whatever price the college is quoting. So it's referred to as merit aid or merit scholarships or academic scholarships. These terms all sort of mean the same thing. But at the end of the day, it's an attempt by a school to use money to increase or maintain its market share.
I just have to add, the practicality of that from a business and marketing perspective in the way you explained it really does help me as somebody who has children at the age where this is appropriate to learn about, ground me in the excitement that I see or would see in what could be just a small amount of merit aid, where as a parent, I feel like, oh my gosh, my kid is so special, and that could somehow magnetize me to have my child attend that school. And as you're explaining it, for me, it's like, wow, this is no different than being a consumer shopping for anything else.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Brian, because it can be difficult for parents who went through this process as applicants a generation ago. If they went to college or if they applied to a college that was pretty competitive, it can be difficult to understand, to process the fact that things are really different now. And it's tempting to think of all of these institutions as gatekeepers from an admissions perspective, with people wearing tweedy coats and with elbow patches and smoking pipes and, sitting around deliberating for 60 minutes about this kid or that kid. But the fact of the matter is that there's a couple thousand schools out there fighting for market share. And it's only a couple of dozen that have the market power and therefore the pricing power not to throw money at teenage children to try to sway their decision making. Now, they do it in different ways, but what's most important for parents is to start with the understanding that the vast majority of these schools are kind of hard up. They're worried that they're not going to make their number, and they're using pricing and discounting to try to change people's minds by making them feel good about themselves, by making them feel meritorious, right? So, we use this term merit aid because it has become the sort of term of art, but not because it's the best description for what's going on. I think overall, a better description might just be a coupon that happens to be worth 5 figures a year in many instances.
So Ron, what I hear you saying is I need some elbow patches and a smoking pipe when I'm reviewing these merit-based scholarships and such at my university.
I mean, you jest, right? But I'm encouraging what is, in fact, nearly impossible. I'm encouraging a approaching this from a distance with clinical detachment and almost academic understanding of the economics at work that are at work here and in play, and not from the highly emotional perspective that most of us, in fact, do approach it with as parents of these precious children. When we're trying to attach rocket boosters to their bodies one last time to send them off into the stratosphere, it's almost impossible to maintain emotional distance. And that's precisely why the schools use terms like merit scholarships, because they want our kids and us to feel like we've won this game that people spend years trying to figure out what the rules are in the first place.
This reminds me of the bumper sticker that my mother had on the back of our 15-year-old blue station wagon, an orange bumper sticker that said, "My child got straight A's at East End Elementary." And she was so proud of that I didn't feel like it would be right for me to ever get straight A's again, so she could keep that bumper sticker on for the rest of my childhood. Sorry to.
So, I mean, again, right? It's like we're laughing here, but think about the pride that so many parents take, rightfully so in most instances, in the college bumper sticker that they put on the back of their car when their kids go to college. Or think about the Instagram sweatshirt reveal that so many high school seniors are, engaging in this in every admissions season, right? There's like an element of sort of, bragging rights to it or something. And just to subvert that, I was at the National Association of College Admissions Counselors conference a couple of months ago promoting this new course I put together about merit aid. And I printed out all of these bumper stickers that look like the kinds of college stickers you'd put in the windshield. But instead they said things like, "Ask me about my kid's merit aid package," or "It's not how you go, but where you go." And people ate those up. And, I'm glad. We should all be driving around with those bumper stickers and, not the ones that say Starvard or whatever.
Well, I actually have a great one that I stole from Christian. It just says Ivy League graduate, so people think that I'm the smart one. So, Christian, if you're wondering where your magnet went, sorry, it's more useful for me. Not to interrupt. I know Christian had a question.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear the difference between merit aid and loans, given how emotionally charged the discussion about student loans and the student loan crisis is.
Yeah, so this is all really complicated, and it's not your fault for not understanding it, Christian. It's not anybody's fault. I guess I'd sort of back way up and say, when you apply to college, you can choose to, but you don't have to, apply for need-based financial aid. And so if you apply for need-based financial aid, you fill out the federal FAFSA form, and then a couple hundred other schools will make you file something called the CSS profile form. And both those forms are designed to assess your need, right? What do you earn? What do you have? And then what might it be reasonable, as far as the school's concerned, for you to part with? And then the school sizes that up and they say, okay, this is what the need is. Maybe we're going to meet all of that need, or maybe we're only going to need 75% of it and cross our fingers that the family will figure out, some way to meet that other 25%. And then they create these packages, right? So a need-based package will consist of whatever grants, scholarships, money that you don't have to pay back, that the school will offer up from its own budget, its own resources, right? So that's a grant component. Then there's the loan component. And so the school is suggesting, but not ordering you to take out loans from the federal government, right? And that FAFSA form determines whether you're eligible for those federal loans and what kind. So again, you don't have to take out those student loans, but you can if you want. Federal loans, you can only take out to about $31,000 over 4 years under most circumstances. So the grants, the scholarships, merit aid, that's something different, right? But again, just to try to clear up any confusion, the schools think about need-based aid and merit aid as being two different things, right? Now, sometimes they'll confuse things by putting it all on the same offer letter, right? But need-based aid, the grants there, the scholarships there are based on your income and your assets. Merit aid depends more on what kind of grades or scores or activities that you have, right? And so, loans, you got to pay back, right, to the federal government or maybe some private lender. Merit aid, it's a scholarship, it's a grant. It's money that comes from the school. Sometimes there's a federal grant called the Pell Grant. That's money you never have to pay back. It comes straight off the top, and that's it.
And that's the ones you want, right?
Yeah, ideally, right? You'd rather have a money that sort of converts into a discount or a coupon that you don't have to repay than a loan that you've got to start paying back sometimes the moment you start school.
Yeah. So I think this definitely shows kind of the importance of grades, extracurriculars, everything that you're doing in high school before you're getting to college, because it's financially, it's going to be much more beneficial for you potentially.
Yeah. So this is the thing that's sort of messy here, right? At its bluntest, in its most blunt form, merit aid is an instrument by which schools improve their reputations by purchasing teenagers in the open market according to their statistics. So, if you look at many state schools, and some private schools do this as well, they just post a grid, right? And if you get X GPA crossed with X ACT or SAT score, it's worth $20,000 off per year. But if your stats are a little lower, it's 16. It's a little lower, it's 14. If it's a little lower, it's 8. And if it's even lower than that, you probably won't get in. So why would schools do this? Well, schools like to win, right? They like to have the best, or at least increasing student quality, right? It makes faculty happy. It looks good on the US news rankings, depending on, how the formula has changed in any given year. US News has been doing a lot of adjustment of its formulas, right? But, families, teenagers, they want to go to school with good students. They want to be part of an institution that has a high academic profile. And for all those reasons, it makes sense for schools to buy better than average students away from other institutions for as long as it makes sense to them financially, right? And some schools just post their formula right there for everybody to see. Now, at many other schools, it's not that blunt, right? They're probably using some software in the background to sort of make your first offer. We can talk about that some more later. But, they will claim, with at least some truth to it, that they're doing a more holistic evaluation where they're reading a kid's entire application and then, offering a merit aid scholarship accordingly, which is, sort of the first offer, and they hope that people say yes.
Ron, and the purpose for this question I'm getting ready to ask is that you did a good job painting a picture of schools trying to create a competitive advantage to get the top students to improve their own metrics to look better, so they're ranked higher, right? Every once in a while, and I don't know how many these prodigies that I'm getting ready to speak about exist in the country, each graduating class, but you see news stories of kids that are 16 years old or 14 years old going to Harvard or Yale or whatever. Are we close to the day where these schools now start throwing NIL dollars to those students, not just athletes anymore, but because they could be the poster children of that university?
Great question.
I mean, that's an excellent question. And, the answer is kind of nuanced, right? Let's just kind of assess the playing field, right? You mentioned some, highly rejected colleges, universities there. The fact of the matter is that Harvard doesn't have to discount at all if they don't want to, right? There are, 1,000 million trillion people in the United States who would gladly beg, steal, borrow, or just, grab money out of a trust fund to pay Harvard, not just the $85,000 a year or so that they charge, but what is actually $120,000, $130,000 a year that they probably spend educating every undergraduate. So Harvard doesn't have to offer anybody anything. The fact of the matter is that they are very generous with need-based aid, for every student who has need. And their formulas are, for what they assess of your income and assets are generous because the school is rich. Harvard does not have to offer merit aid. It does not have to buy that 12-year-old in the open market. If that 12-year-old comes from a low-income family, that 12-year-old will go to Harvard for free. But they don't actually have to, shovel green cash money at kids to get them to come. But I'm so glad you brought it up because I am starting to spot schools that you may have never even heard of or have heard of only vaguely, if you happen to watch the Division II soccer tournament or whatever this time of year, that are in fact paying kids to come, right? They're offering them a full ride plus $6,000 a year to do whatever they want with, but hopefully for research and summer enrichment or take a free internship. So they're actually putting money on the table to get kids to come. So are we starting to head there? Yeah. Is it going to be, Ivy League schools or similar ones that do it? No.
Does any of this create upward pressure on what we refer to as the cost of college, like the sticker price of colleges?
Not necessarily. So there's a couple things to think about there, right? First of all, a natural question that's related to yours is if so many people are getting discounts, or at many schools, if everybody is getting a merit aid award, why not just lower the sticker price in the first place and dispense with this whole charade? And some schools do that. So every year there's a couple who do what's called a repricing in the industry. And they've just determined that their high list price scares a bunch of people away because those people don't understand how the merit aid system works. And so they've lowered their prices in the hopes that they can attract more applicants and that will be better for them financially, right? So to answer your question directly, merit aid only causes problems for schools or forces them to raise the list price for, the students who do pay it, if they're not paying enough attention to net tuition revenue per student over time, and even during the course of the admission season, right? School has a budget, that they have to run the school. And believe it or not, it's these, heads of admission, they're known as vice presidents of enrollment now, who are the most important cog in that wheel, right? Because tuition revenue, right, comes from the students. And it's the VPs of enrollment who dictate the pricing. And they dictate the pricing through the merit aid offers they offer up to get whatever yield that they hope to get so that they can meet the budget, right? And so it only causes problems if you discount too much or if you need to discount a ton just to put heads in the beds. And then maybe you raise the list price for the people with both the ability to pay and the willingness to pay to try to balance it out. So it's not easy, right? And, none of this is to point a finger at, these vice presidents of enrollment or these schools who have inherited a system that they would almost certainly not build from scratch this way. But it sort of is what it is, and it's pretty hard to change it on a dime. And so this is what we have to live with, and this is why we spend time trying to explain it and understand it.
Do all schools offer merit aid? And if so, what is the interaction between merit aid and need-based aid, if any?
Not all schools offer merit aid. So in general, merit aid is something that you offer if people with the ability to pay your full price no longer have the willingness to do so, right? So forget about need-based aid for a second. What we're talking about is ability to pay and willingness to pay. And if you're finding that you can no longer attract the caliber of students that you want at your posted price, you either lower the posted price or you start throwing a lot of money at the kinds of kids you most want to come, or maybe just at everybody to try to hit your net tuition revenue per student. And so today, 2023, there are maybe 40 or so providers of residential undergraduate education who do not need to offer merit aid. Then there are some that are, kind of so on that border that they sometimes change in the middle of the season. 10 years ago, Franklin and Marshall, on most people's list of, top 25 small liberal arts colleges in the United States, made a big display of not doing merit anymore. They wanted to devote all of their discount dollars to people who needed the money the most. So, very principled stand. What they found last year was that was no longer sustainable. And they figured out in the middle of the season that the number of yeses coming back was so low, was so far off what their target was, that they needed to do an instant pivot and start throwing merit awards at kids to, buy them away from other schools. Mm-hmm. So that's about the point in the marketplace at the, sort of Franklin and Marshall level, where schools decide they really just have no choice. Now, some of them are a little more strategic, right? Duke University, the University of Chicago, they do merit aid. You would think they wouldn't have to because they only accept whatever it is, 6, 8, 10, 12% of their students overall. But University of Chicago would very much like to buy more kids away from the Ivy League. And so they throw 10 or 12 or 14 or $16,000 at, a couple hundred students each year who are kind of in the top tier to try and sweeten the deal for them. 50 grand, 60 grand over 4 years, that can be a difference maker if it's a close call. Duke does it a little differently. They throw a bunch of full tuition scholarships around, but not 200 or 300. They too are trying to attract students who might be superstars at Yale or Stanford or Berkeley, by making it very enticing for them to come south of the Mason-Dixon line.
Hey there, podcast fam. We'd love to hear from you. Please take this moment to rate and subscribe to our podcast. Your feedback fuels our passion to bring you more engaging content. And please, text this episode to your friends. It's your support that can help us grow. Now back to the show.
Can the children of affluent parents qualify for merit aid?
Yes, they can. In fact, they might be more likely to. And it is those parents who ought to be paying the most attention in many respects. So here's why, right? And this is also the reason why there are so many sophisticated consultants working in the background advising the tweety people with the elbow patches who are smoking pipes. In order to figure out what any given affluent family is able to pay and willing to pay, it requires having as much data as possible, right? So you start as an admissions office hoping to know everything from income to a student's level of interest in your institution. So how do you figure that out, right? If we're defining affluent as any parent who has the ability to pay full price, right? A family that is not applying for need-based aid. That household income starts, somewhere in the range of, it depends on a public school or private school, but, somewhere between $200,000 and $300,000 a year, let's call it. Now, cry those families a river, right? They've had it pretty good in life, and they're probably living pretty well and able to do a lot for their kids. So, they're pretty well advantaged. But if your kid really wants to go to a Franklin and Marshall, and the list price there is $75,000 or $80,000 a year. You can't pay that out of current income on a $275,000 household income. And if you have only recently started earning that much, you probably haven't saved anywhere near what you need, right? So those families have what's known as a felt need. That's how they refer to it in the trade. They can't demonstrate the need for need-based aid, but they definitely feel like they can't pay full price. Now, they might be willing to suck it up and borrow a bunch of money or do God knows what, if their kid gets into Yale. But are they willing to do it for Franklin and Marshall? Are they willing to do it for Denison, for Redlands, for the University of Alabama, paying out-of-state prices? No. Many, or maybe most of them, are not, right? So this is when the merit aid system and the consultants come into play. So the consultants look at your zip code, which turns out to be a proxy, a pretty good one for your household income, averaged out over everybody who lives there. So they take a stab, right, a guess at your ability to pay. Then they look at your kid's interest. And wouldn't you know it, because 2023 and because we love technology so much, they've been keeping careful score on whether kids are responding to text messages, opening emails from the school, how often they've been on the website of the school. They've looked at historical performance and retention of every kid from your kid's high school and your region the last 10 or 15 or 20 years, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And all that gets fed into a giant algorithm. You knew there was an algorithm involved. Pretty soon they're going to start calling it AI. It's really just an algorithm, software, right? And the software makes a guess as to exactly what kind of discount, but not $1 more, will cause your family to say yes. And that's how it works.
You brought up an important point that I want to highlight. And it's one of the reasons that we asked you here, and just very candidly, I know we had you on before because I wanted folks to hear your expertise in this area. And we talked about your previous book, The Price You Pay for College. And this time, again, I've reviewed much of your course, and I think it's even better than the book. And there are a lot of parents out there who would find your course a heck of a lot. There would be way more value when compared to hiring an independent consultant to work through this process. And I have a lot of friends who do that. It's very expensive. And I point this out because when you threw around the number of household income of $200,000 to $300,000, if you're a younger listener, you probably are shrugging your shoulders thinking, how can parents who have a household income in that range have a tough time paying for Franklin and Marshall? But the point that you made that needs to be highlighted is that typically people who have a child getting ready to go to college who are in a household earning $200,000 to $300,000 have not always earned that. Matter of fact, they've probably earned for most of their child's life probably half of that at best. And so they haven't had an opportunity to save as much as they wanted. And now all of a sudden they have peak earnings while at the same time their child's filling out a FAFSA, meaning they're not going to get any need-based aid. So they're in a jam. They're in a jam. And rightfully so, there are schools that recognize that for a child to go to one of these high sticker price colleges, that child or that family, they will need that aid just because of the journey that family was on, through that child's, educational career.
Right. And I don't have to explain this to you, Brian, but, for the benefit of everybody who's out there, you would think that the response to the truths that Brian speaks is just to make college cheaper, right? And that is, in fact, exactly what's going on here. Merit aid makes college cheaper. But because we're America, nothing about personal finance can be simple, right? And this is not necessarily by design, right? These aren't major corporations who are making things complicated in order to trick us. It's just been a generation-long slow evolution involving thousands of well-meaning people at many, many, many hundreds of institutions trying to figure out how to keep the lights on and do right by these teenagers at the same time. And this sort of psychological gamesmanship around merit aid and making people feel like they've gotten a pat on the head was a good enough way to attract high caliber students from competitors 20 or 25 years ago that it just sort of caught on, right? And now it's the system that we're stuck with. And you would think, well, all right, these colleges get together and hang out. Like, why don't they all just sit down together and hash out a new way of doing things? Well, no, that would be an antitrust violation, right? Even though these are not for-profit corporations, the Department of Justice does not want schools to engage in anything that even remotely looks like price fixing. And so here we are, with this mess that we have to untangle as professionals or as parents. And the tricky thing about it is just all too many parents, including incredibly sophisticated ones who are super successful in their own chosen endeavors, approach this each year and just don't have the faintest idea that this is how it works now. So it's tough.
So for our listeners that are parents and might have kids headed to college, or even some of our listeners that are students and headed to college, I know you've mentioned several of the different ways that you can get married, but what are some more of those reasons or considerations, or the most common reasons even that schools give merit aid?
Sure. So every school has its own collection of somewhat idiosyncratic institutional priorities, right? They may have a special program or programs. They may, for their own reasons, want more kids from the Great Plains in any given year. There may not be enough violinists in the orchestra. They may have all graduated, or they're all about to graduate. And, as ever, a school's board or, president or chancellor may make a determination that for any number of reasons, the school ought to increase the average horsepower of the average student, or maybe decrease the average horsepower because they need more bodies at, X number of dollars per year. And so all of that will, affect the way that they price things. And the challenge is that schools aren't always clear about what their goals are. Now, so it's hard to sort of position yourself. So the good news here, and we probably should have made this clear earlier, that in many instances, although not all, schools just automatically consider you for their various levels of merit aid. You don't have to do anything at all to put yourself in the running. Now, then there's a bunch of schools that have, full ride programs, right? Maybe it's all of tuition, or maybe it's all of tuition and room and board. And in most instances, although again, not all, you might have to fill out a different essay or go through some interview processes, or maybe even show up, with 25 other finalists some weekend in the spring where, you're all in competition with one another, trying to elbow one another out in front of whatever group of people are evaluating you. That can be kind of intimidating. So first thing you have to do is just look at a school's website and figure out, all right, what the heck's going on here? Are they telling me what the criteria are? And if they are explaining anything at all about that, is there a way in which I can position myself while filling out my application to make myself more attractive to either the people or the software that's making the first offer?
Yeah, it's interesting you bring the states up, and so things that you don't even necessarily, you're just automatically considered for. I remember with my undergrad at Vanderbilt, the class, the chancellor was very proud that we had at least one student from every state in the class. Yeah. And so it's interesting. It can be things that, we're not even thinking of. It's not just grades, it's not just ACT scores. It could be just that the school has a need to kind of fill a particular niche or area.
Or it's ego, right? Whoever it was that wrote that note. Somebody said it, I quoted this guy in my book. I think he was running the admissions operation at the University of Oregon 10, 12, 15 years ago when he uttered this. He's now deceased. But he said, and excuse my French, he's like, nobody likes to lose, right? He said, this is a competitive market and I want to go out there and kick some ass, right? I mean, nobody wants to, lose the above average students to the school down the road or the school across the country. And, if your competitors are attractive enough, the kids are, willing to come from Juneau to Nashville, right? And you're not Vanderbilt, you're Duke, and you can't get kids to come from Fairbanks to Durham. Well, maybe you think that means there's something wrong with you and you want to do something about it. Yeah, right? So, right. So maybe you offer a full ride the following year to that kid from Fairbanks, right? Or you steal the kid from Juneau who was going to go to Vanderbilt.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And I think just seeing these students as like assets for their ego or their pride or what have you, is a good reframe to be kind of thinking about a lot of this application process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we should be clear that, in pitting Vanderbilt against Duke, we're in pretty rarefied air there. The fact of the matter is that, several steps down the food chain, these schools are just trying to keep the lights on. And again, right, if they miss their number, if they're aiming for 2,000 people in the first year class, and on April 28th, it's at like 1910, right? They're short 90. That's a lot of revenue. And if their historical data don't show them adding those last 90 students in the last 48 hours, then they're going to start throwing more money at kids who haven't made up their minds yet. It happens each and every year. I get these crazy notes from parents on May 2nd. Ron, you're not going to believe what happened. We just kept silent, right? We didn't say anything to any of these schools. And all of a sudden the emails and the text started coming in. They're literally throwing thousands of dollars at my teenager. It's amazing. It happened just like you said it would. There's a level of desperation out there because these VPs of enrollment lose their jobs if they miss their numbers by too much, in too many straight years.
Wow. That's just absolutely fascinating. And a good perspective for, parents, for students that are, as you said, there's this emotional reactivity. In the application process. And so it's a good to hear about kind of the other side, the university side of they need you. Mm-hmm. So I guess looking at some other sides of it, like when do schools actually inform the applicants of how much merit aid they're going to qualify?
Yeah, usually you get the notice. If the school's doing it well, you get the notice, you get the price at the same time that you get in, right? So you try to capitalize on the sort of emotional euphoria or satisfaction that comes from getting a yes with an offer that feels like, wow, not only is this a yes, but they really want me. I'm a presidential scholar, right? Now, they don't bother telling you that like hundreds of other kids are going to be presidential scholars, right? They just want to use a word that, is going to sort of grab you by the throat emotionally and maybe cause you to think different about that school.
Or put it on a bumper sticker.
Right. My child can beat up your merit aid student or whatever, right?
Yeah. So following up with that, though, so how long do these merit aid awards last? Is it just for freshman year? Is it for all 4 years?
They generally extend all 4 years. You usually have to maintain some kind of grade point average to keep it. Usually it's an achievable number. It's not like you have to have a 3.95 in order to keep your merit aid. Most of the time, the offer does not go up, according to inflation, right? If it's $26,000 per year, it'll be the same all 4 years, but you should always ask about that.
Ron, where can parents learn about this box that you've unpacked here on our podcast?
Sure. Information is scarce. It's often passed along anecdotally through the sort of parental grapevine. And over the years, people have, built bigger and better grapevines, mostly online, right? People will exchange this information on Reddit or on sites like, College Confidential. There's one I really like called the Paying for College 101 Facebook group. There's another one on paying for college for high-income families, and you can get some good information there. I built my course on Merit Aid, which is a couple of hours of video, plus a lot of resources, which you can access anytime you want. It's at meritaidcourse.com. I built it because after The Price You Pay for College came out, and I started running around the country speaking about the topic and, looking at my email that came from readers, I'd say the majority of the questions and the most urgent ones were about Merit Aid. Now, I thought I had done a reasonably good job in the book of explaining this all to people, but I did not give them enough. And there seemed like an almost limitless appetite for the information, which sort of makes sense, right? I mean, if you can knock 6 figures off the cost of a 4-year education and you had no idea that that was possible as a relatively affluent family, you'd probably want to know more too. So, I should have seen that coming, but when it became clear that there was an appetite for it, I built a course around it. So that's at meritaidcourse.com.
Which is why we wanted you on it, because all due respect to Reddit and Google University, this is far too important and financially consequential to rely on those two sources. So we love to end the podcast with just some straightforward, simple advice that our listeners can remember and perhaps share with others. Based on our conversation and what you think is most essential, what would that be?
Sure. I'd say, first of all, start early, right? I think it's only fair that a child knows as they're starting high school that their academic record doesn't just influence the kinds of schools that they can go to, it will also influence the price and whether it's actually affordable for the family. Now, people worry or wonder whether that's going to put too much pressure on kids, but kids already are under a lot of pressure. They can figure this information out in about 30 seconds by running around online. They hear about it from older kids. And then, imagine shielding kids from this information until the first semester of their senior year. If you do that and explain it to them, then they might be like, why did you not trust me with this? I might have actually done things differently in high school had I known, right? So I feel like it's only fair that kids know about this. And then, you got to be honest with them about your ability to pay, your capacity to borrow, and your willingness to do so. If your budget is going to top out at X dollars, then you've got to do the homework to see whether your kids' favorite schools or the ones that your kids might want to go visit may discount, whether through need-based aid or merit aid, to that price that's actually going to be possible for you. Because if it's not going to happen, it isn't very nice to dangle it in front of them as a possibility. And also you're wasting your time if you go visit a school that just isn't going to be affordable no matter what. And then finally, right, just try to take as much of an emotionless approach, a clear-headed approach to the process as you can. And when feelings come up, name them, right? It's okay if you fear your kid is going to fall down the social class ladder if they don't go to this school or that school. It's okay that you feel guilt, although you probably should not, right? It's understandable that you might feel guilt that you may not be able to afford to do whatever it is that happened when you went to college, if you went to college. And then also, acknowledge your elitism and your snobbery about what different nameplates might mean and who they actually matter to or who they might not, right? Know yourself, be emotionally intelligent in how you handle your feelings. And there's a much better chance then that, you'll get through this process with a result that makes sense and creates happiness for everybody in the family.
As always, Ron, great advice, great conversation. Thank you for coming on.
It's my pleasure.
A special thanks to our guest and, of course, to all of our listeners. Don't forget to click subscribe wherever you download your podcast, give us a rating, and share the Modern Husbands podcast with others. Doing so goes a long way in growing our reach. And join your fellow modern husbands and have links to our podcasts, articles, and other resources to manage money in the home as a team sent to your inbox every 2 weeks by subscribing to our newsletter at modernhusbands.com. Until next time, be well.